Hello, and welcome to the lore of Braunhaven. Today's episode, we're going to be continuing our exploration of the University District of the Imperial Port, and we will be starting with the Servants Ward. The Servants Ward, and sometimes called the Servants District, is not really an official ward or district. It just kind of sprang up on its own along this makeshift road called Servants Road. This is where the household staff and servants that would work in the High District would generally live. Of course, the rich people don't want the poors living with them, and so they had them live outside the walls of the High District in the servants' ward. And so it's not quite as destitute and slummy as, say, the Docks District, but it is by no means affluent in any ways. The entire ward is mostly made up of row houses for the wealthier servants, and of course tenement homes for the rest. um, the servants would leave servants ward, and they would come in through the southerly way gate into the High District, which would lead directly into the shopping district, which then they had to travel usually over to the residential district, or excuse me, residential ward. Usually the middle class didn't have as many servants, but there was probably a few that made their way up to that area as well. This could be kind of a problem. The High District is not a small area in any way, and so some of the servants, of course, would attempt to come in through the Main Street gate, but that was generally discouraged. Southerly Ways Gate was created specifically for Servants Row, and or Servants Road and the Servant Ward, and so they were. It wasn't, against the law or anything, but it was discouraged. The people in the residential district didn't want the riffraff type to be seen coming through the Main Street gate, and so they were relegated more to Southerly Way. Probably would get a mild admonishment for having used Main Street if it was brought to the master of the house's attention, but nothing more than that. Today, there are a number of people that still live in the servants ward, but they are no longer really servants to anybody in the High District. The Earthwack hobgoblins have closed off the gates with their impeccably good common written on signs, and they basically anybody that is classified as a servant is forced to live inside the High District. They're not really slaves, but they are highly encouraged to not leave. And so the servants that are staying in the High District are pretty much working 24 hours a day, in in exchange for food and housing. And some of the houses that are left in the High District, of course, are much nicer than what they would have been given if they were living in servants' ward. But that doesn't change the fact that they are kept people. And so the people that are currently living in the servants' ward are kind of the down and outs that want to be left alone. They don't really want to get involved with the Thieves Guild of the Merchant District. They don't. They might try to better themselves in the University District, but for the most part, they just want to be left alone. During the spring and summer months, or I'm sorry, spring through fall months, there is a small open market that opens up in the servants' ward that allows the people that live there to kind of trade back and forth with one another. And so there is some market going on there. Nothing that would be considered, you know, really huge. A part of the servants' ward is, of course, a small dock for shipbuilding, and this was pretty much the private domain of the rich people that live in the High District, and so they would commission their own small ships to be built, usually for their usually for their own private trade and mercantiles. They wanted to send these ships to uh, be purchasing the best and brightest for the High District. They wanted Orentian silks. They wanted, Orentian silks in China. They wanted Arabashian cottons, the finest Arabashian tobacco. They imported all of the high end stuff privately themselves. It was not for sale. Their stuff wasn't for sale in the merchant district. This would go directly to Docks Place Pier and then directly into the High District. The people of Servants' Ward in the current age, they don't have a whole lot going for them. They want to be left alone, live a quiet life, and so the only way that they really have to make money, aside from the occasional thievery and skullduggery, they would, of course, go down to Docks Place Pier to do some fishing, and that fish can then be sold directly south in the Merchants Ward at the fish market. And so that's kind of how they get by. They do some fishing, they sell it to the fish market, they pick some pockets, probably in the grand mall of the merchant district, and then they go home. And they if assuming they don't get caught or beat, they go home and they live a quiet life, and they don't have to pay any of the tax that the Thieves Guild throws out, because they just want to be left alone. They're not doing anything. Docks Place Pier was where those ships that were built at this private shipyard would be docked. It's not a very large pier. That there would be, in the ages past, there would be a couple of finely appointed ships that would be docked here. Some might even classify them as yachts. But they were actually working ships. But the crews of these ships were either they were much better paid, for one, and two, the appointments of the interiors of these ships were much finer than you would find on normal working class vessels. And so it was a very highly desired position to be hired as a ship's hand for one of the ships off of Docks Place Pier, because these were owned by the up and coming and the wealthy, and they spared no expense. It didn't matter to them that these ships were going clear across the Dragon Sea to Arentis to bring back goods that essentially were in the same crates that would be taken to the merchant district by merchant vessels. These ships were finely appointed. The captain had the finest wine available. They had the finest rum. They had actual beds rather than just netted cots. So it was a highly desirable position, and they would all get paid a very good wage, usually about 10 gold pieces a day for officers and 5 for working crew. So that was a good gig if you could get it. There wasn't a whole lot of hiring done for crew of ships at Docks Place Pier because there weren't that many ships. Usually several of the higher class would go in together and kind of purchase one vessel, and then they would go in together to purchase a lot of merchandise, and then then you would have 5 or 6 of these merchants that would all get a delivery at the same time. Which, of course, for the upper class, that kept their costs down. One thing about being rich is realizing that the rich don't spend money; they have money. And they just keep accumulating money. But they also realize that you can't make money without spending money, and so it's a confusing dichotomy. But today, Docks Place Pier is, of course, mostly empty. But there is one ship that is docked at Docks Place Pier, and it is a war galley. And this war galley is owned by the Earthwhack Hobgoblin mercenaries of the High District. For the most part, this galley can be seen there almost always. However, occasionally the hobgoblins do man the ship, and they take off. They don't ever say where they're going or what they're doing. They usually man the war galley with what would be considered a barely skeleton crew, and they leave. And then a couple of weeks later, they return with no sign as to why they left, what they were doing. They usually don't unload cargo. Sometimes they do return with supplies and sometimes slaves that were purchased elsewhere or captured, but that even in that is a very rare thing. Nobody knows where the hobgoblins are going or what they're doing. So that is Servants Ward and Dock Place Pier. Next time we will be talking about the Drowned Child and the Cult of the Drowned Child, and we'll go into a little bit of background about that. For anybody that's interested in knowing more about the Imperial Port, that can be found in Tassadantulus' Tantalizing Tower. That book, as well as the Braunhaven campaign setting, and the two bundles, which include the Braunhaven campaign setting, the Braunhaven Adventure Bundle and the Mountain Adventure Bundle, are on sale right now for Memorial Day. That will be going through my birthday, the author's birthday, through June 2nd. So they are 20% off, and I knocked 20% off of my my cut for the hardback books. So if you decide to get Tantalizing Tower, you'll get it slightly cheaper in the hardcover than you would normally. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time where we will talk about the Drowned Child.